When I was pretty young as a child, I was subjected to one of the goriest things that I could have ever witnessed in my entire life. And today, I want to briefly talk about it. Gears of War. Despite the director's commitment to authenticity with language, The Passion of the Christ is riddled with one of Mel Gibson's most deliberately odd artistic choices, namely in the casting of the actors. And I don't mean white Jesus, although I do mean Jim Caviezel. It's not that he has the wrong skin tone or the incorrect ethnic background to play this part, or even that he does a poor job portraying this passionate part. He's in fact phenomenal. The actual problem is something much dumber. Jim Caviezel is way too handsome to be playing Jesus. It's in the Bible.
He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him.
That's from the same passage that the movie opens with. Now, Caviezel isn't the most attractive of men out there. I mean, he's up there. He's above average, right? But the problem for The Passion is how every other character was casted. Because I noticed, every single character's level of attractiveness consistently correlates with their measure of morality. It's a calculable scale. The more good they are, the more attractive they are. And the more evil someone is, the more abhorrent their appearance. It's like a spectrum of descending beauty.
It's like a rainbow of ugly.
It's a weird theory, but I want to talk about it. Starting with Jim Caviezel, he's obviously on the good end. He's Jesus, the ultimate standard, completely good, and therefore the most attractive. No one goes beyond him. Next is his mother Mary. Since this film is the work of a Roman Catholic, she's obviously going to be immediately next. And while Monica Magdalene is perhaps prettier overall, I think Mel's intention was to capture the purity of her motherhood, especially when we see the evil that attempts to mirror her. John is next. As biblically mentioned, John is the disciple Jesus beloved, so he comes right after Mary and right before Mary, the one who's portrayed as the woman caught in adultery. Having been shown mercy, she's taken the words, "Go and sin no more," to heart. Jumping ahead, Veronica follows. She had no involvement with the death of Jesus, she merely listened and found him bloodied and tired, so she used a clean cloth to wipe a fraction of the horrors from his face. Before the crown of thorns was placed, both Marys are met by the wife of Pontius Pilate, Claudia, the Gentile who rightly recognized Jesus' closest relatives. Like Veronica, she also offered up some clean cloths. These rags are for the Marys to soak up the several ounces of suffering. And such kindness places Claudia next on the spectrum. Following Claudia are, in general, the ones who responded positively to Jesus. Be it a soldier, a servant, or another soldier, all these men are still in the physically attractive side because of some change of heart despite being adjacent to the suffering. Next is somebody responsible for the suffering, the one who gave the orders he was pressured to give, Pontius Pilate. He is the halfway mark. Compared to everybody else in The Passion, Pilate is perfectly in between handsome and ugly, reflecting his conflicted feelings about executing an innocent man.
Si humpno condemnabo, sciu Caiafam, seditionem initiaturum esse. Si ita condemnabo, discipuli eius initiabunt, uter libet sanguis effunditur.
He may have attempted to free Jesus verbally, but in the end he washes his hands and pretends that he was not a part of this. Similarly, Peter refuses to take part. Though present at the arrest, he attempts to prevent it by taking out that soldier's ear, an action Jesus rebukes.
Kefa. Kuldi ahead la krova. Big krova gebut.
And he denies thrice the accusation of his association with the man in questioning, abandoning his friend in his time of need after swearing hours before that he would never do so. Now, perhaps it's odd to place Peter after Pilate, given that Pilate did send Jesus away to be flogged and crucified. However, while Pilate's actions were necessary to redeem the world, the denial of and distancing from the Redeemer was not necessary. The shame is immediate, and he runs away with his guilt. But that's all he does, unlike Judas, who does have a change of heart, which is what made him so hard to place on this scale. He is the betrayer, necessary for the rest of the pieces to fall where they would. The thing is, the betrayer tries to return the silver, showing his guilt as well as his pathetic efforts to atone. But is he really physically uglier than Peter? I mean, side by side, Peter is rocking the receding hairline and baggy eyes, unlike Judas, who looks fairly okay. In fact, the betrayer almost looks innocent when it comes to this scale. But why place him after Pilate and Peter? The demons.
Destroy the child.
The arguably unnecessary outward spiritual attack.
Corrupt them all.
That haunts and taunts Judas after the arrest.
This is their plan, people. These are demons. Just like the Bible says.
While I do appreciate the guilt-driven traitor being depicted, I'm not sure that we needed a demon werewolf to illustrate that. Anyway, it's the children that poke and prod and torture Judas that explain why he's next on the list. They accuse him and abuse him, combining his kinder features with the extreme ugly he's attacked by and his fate in the first act. That's why Judas is next on the list. Alright, now who could possibly come after Judas? Well, if he did the handing over of Jesus, who did he hand Jesus over to? That would be the Pharisees. That is, the high priests, the Jewish leaders. You know, the ones who seem to have been casted based on how evil they can look when they scowl.
Hey, fella, why the long face?
Historically, they're the ones behind the arrest, the ones who falsely accused Jesus of things he did not say nor do, and they're the ones who led the rallying cry of "Crucify him" for the crowds to chant. Even though there's like 2 Pharisees that defend Jesus, or at the very least just call into question the questioning, these men are still just as ugly, if not worse, than the rest of them. And to go off script for a second, I'm actually surprised that the Pharisees aren't further down the spectrum, because knowing what we might know about Mel Gibson, I thought they'd be the worst of the worst, but it turns out that he's actually quite balanced when it comes to how he paints all of the awful people. Because if I give my eyes the respect they deserve, the next people on the list are objectively worse, and it's all downhill from here. So, while the Pharisees may have been the initiators of the Passion, who else could be next but the executors of the Passion? Those who carried out the suffering, the blows, the whips, the nails. It's the soldiers, Caiaphas' crew, and the Romans. They might have been further back on the scale had it not been for their cruelty uncalled for. The beatings and the bridge drop were not required of them. Neither was the sheer pleasure from the scourging or the beatings on the way to Golgotha. Finally, the Romans were the ones to craft the crown of thorns, made to mock the Messiah. And while their role in the Passion was simply following orders, they did not need to be this into it. You know what I mean? Who's next? Oh.
Uh-oh, we're in trouble.
Before I explain the next person on this alignment spectrum, I have to say that when I first watched The Passion, by the time we reached Pilate, I had already formed this theory that the ugliest characters were the most evil. So when Barabbas was announced, I thought to myself, oh.
He's going to be the ugliest feathermucker in this movie, isn't he?
And sure enough.
He's so ugly! I love him!
In Mel's movie, Barabbas is depicted as the mal-faced murdering robber to contrast the innocence of Jesus, of course, even though the Gospels of Mark and Luke both describe Barabbas as an insurrectionist as well as a murderer, so not the cleverest of revolutionaries being portrayed here. Though his laugh does make me smile. I'd be pretty happy too. But if he's the ugliest, why are there still spots left empty on the scale? Turns out I forgot about the androgynous Satan. Fitting, as the accuser, the deceiver, the enemy should be, on the farthest opposite end away from the Christ. But there's something odd about androgynous Satan. Even though she's not the worst thing to look at, there's a reason Gibson had the devil appear as she does.
It's attractive, yet it's intimidating. Masculine, yet feminine. For me, I think evil is something that when it comes to you, it's not necessarily going to come with a sign saying, I'm evil.
And I'm saying she because the actress is a tress, but clearly the goal was to have the Satan look as sexless as possible.
You didn't quite know whether she was a man or a woman because we played with her voice.
To be devoid of protecting life, nor especially producing it. In a way, she's attractive to nobody, even though androgyny is kind of nice sometimes, but that's not the point. That's why in a few scenes she's contrasted with Mother Mary, the greatest of all mothers. Because as opposed to the producer of the one who is and creates life, the Satan can only produce death. So what the literal hell is going on with that baby?
Damn, that's an ugly baby!
That baby is inarguably the ugliest being in the movie, as intended by the director.
What's with the kid?
We actually do see him earlier when torturing Judas, so clearly there's a connection between the devil's underling and the devil's infant. He shows up for the flogging scene, then never shows up again as far as I remember. What's the point of him? And how could he be worse than the androgynous Satan? Well, after looking up the actor's article on Italian Wikipedia, Davide Marotta played the part of El Anticristo. That baby is the Antichrist. Awesome.
Either crazy or an act of genius.
Yes.
You're certifiable.
The only thing the devil can produce is something worse than the devil. Madonna and Child. Corrupted. The antithesis of Christ, found on the opposite end of the spectrum, the furthest from the good, the true Antichrist, thus the name. And there you have it, the Passion of the Christ explained in the weirdest way I wanted to. Not initially, though. In fact, I had a longer, more casually vlogged video planned and even filmed, but I wasn't sure you guys are ready for that yet. So I'm going to stick to the essay format until I'm more accustomed to these off-the-cuff reviews. But this idea, this theory, was one of the points I wanted to bring up in that longer review. And I figured that fully unpacking the theory could either expose me for being wrong or expose Gibson for being in the wrong, and I think you can tell where I see myself there.
You're crazy. No, you're crazy.
The man is crazy. Someone who would want to tell the story of Jesus' last 12 hours alive would have to be crazy.
But I've spent about 10 years thinking about it, so I just feel ready to either expel it and do it or explode.
To use your own money to make a Jesus movie, one that's not about his full life but his full death, and to scrounge from the depths of history the dead languages that were living at the time, that is nuts. And I am here for it.
I don't know what that means.
That must be